Welcome to the Unfiltered Healing Podcast. I'm Dr. Rachel Hamill. With the topic of peptides and peptide therapy being all the rage right now, I want to pose this question. When would it be necessary or validate using peptide therapy for someone's health? Other than just weight loss or anti-aging purposes, what would really qualify someone to want to use a peptide for optimal health? Check out this clip from our latest podcast to discover why. I think what really excites me and really interesting about peptide therapy for me is, more and more people are beginning to talk and focus on the health of the cell. And mostly, what I see out there right now as far as the topics of what people are conversing and talking about is what can damage the cell. So things like heavy metals and toxins and things like you're talking about and pathogens and most of it is geared toward relieving the cell of that toxic burden, relieving it of um, those things. But hardly any of those conversations are talking about or taking into consideration that many of the cellular issues can occur because the generators within the cell itself, whether it's the mitochondria or what have you, they're not supplying the cell with enough for the cell to do those processes on its own. And so then people, doing these types of therapies either have no really marked results or sometimes they feel worse because they don't have some of these repair mechanisms on board. So for me, I personally love that this can be a great addition to help the rebuilding of the cells, not negating the need to clean up the cells, but, you know, because you can only optimize the body in a cell as good as it can do it on its own.
The biggest thing is that because peptides aren't quite supplements, most of them have not been patented as FDA approved medications. They're basically biologics is the kind of class that the FDA at least has put them in, and they've kind of automatically said, well, they're potentially dangerous, which is a class 2 FDA rating. It doesn't really mean they are dangerous. In fact, most of them are very, very safe. But that doesn't mean that we use them kind of as so with supplements or with other nutrients, you can make health claims, meaning increase vitality, improve skin. But you can't really say treat dermatitis or treats inflammatory bowel disease for that matter. So there are currently, fast forward 8 years from when I started using peptides, there's definitely products now making health claims, which I think is okay. Meaning like people might sort kind of through what they see online and find a peptide that helps their immune system because they're getting sick often, or helps their gut because it has some of those properties. So that's where what I've been trying to really do is understand, okay, God, how did you design us to be optimal? And then what signatures in the blood work or as I get to know someone and their health background could tell me what to use with them versus someone else. So like on your labs that I do with patients, for example, it won't say your BPC 157 levels are low in the body, even though we know it exists in human gastric juice. So we know that if your vagus nerve is working properly, which I'm guessing that you see many patients that it's not, but if we're getting into parasympathetic nervous system mode, and I know it's always a balance and a tone more than a necessarily on or off, but basically to say that rest and digest, there's so few. Our world today is not set up necessarily for the way God designed us to truly be off when we're off and resting and be able to really get into the mode of secreting proper digestive enzymes, hydrochloric acid in the gut. So BPC is a pretty easy one of how we could see someone's stomach lining not producing enough BPC. The ones that get a little bit trickier is like the thymus gland. So thymus peptides are super interesting, and they can really benefit patients with all sorts of immunologic challenges. The thymus glands, not the thyroid, but the thymus exists behind the heart, really, right around here. What we understand is that it involutes out around the age of 20, but it's where, as we're young, our body basically sends T cells to train. It's like and so we always think about our T cells as being very important for a lot of things, but we know that at least certain things in our environment, including viruses and other pathogens, can, at a minimum, distract T cells, at potentially in other ways degrade our production or our use of our own T cells, which are a type of white blood cells that have there's natural killer cells fall into T cells. There's T helper cells that help bring their friends to respond to the right thing. So as someone with your history, you probably intimately know more about T cells than even I do, but we know that when I see certain things, even on a basic CBC, which most people get every year as part of their annual physical, we can actually see, hey, how are your lymphocytes compared to your neutrophils? How is your total white blood cell count? And so there's signatures that could tell me when I combine that with knowing, hey, I get sick every month, no matter what. Ever since this illness, ever since this travel, this has happened. Ever since we can see thymus peptides often seem to turn back on this like training of T cells, rejuvenating them almost, so they can actually fight off things properly. So meaning autoimmune conditions may also, many patients with what have been called autoimmune or immune mediated conditions, we might see benefits in that way too. So those are two classes of peptides that are really cool, the gut specific ones like BPC-157, thymosin, but how else would they get dysregulated? I mean, we think of hormonal dysregulation as a little more obvious, especially in women, oftentimes, because there's changes in the sixth vital sign in terms of the menstrual cycle. But I think a lot of it comes down to like improper sleep and nutrition and rest, if we had to like really simplify it. But then I think each person, I do think of head injuries as uniquely affecting some of this, because I think when we talk about signaling, I think we're still getting to really understand the blood-brain barrier, at least from my perspective. There's so much more to know about what does the brain actually let in versus out, what can be done to treat that. So yeah, it'd be really cool to know, right? Like some of the treatments that you do, how they affect like peptide production in the gut.